صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا غريب يا مظلوم يا شهيد كربلاء. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. حتى إذا جاء أحدهم الموت قال رب ارجعون لعلي أعمل صالحا فيما تركت. كلا إنها كلمة هو قائلها ومن ورائهم برزخ إلى يوم يبعثون. God states in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, when death comes to one of them, he says, my Lord, return me so that I may work righteousness with regard to that which I left behind. No, indeed, these are words that he speaks. And behind them is a barrier until the day they are resurrected. Amanna billah, sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. Let us enliven our hearts and minds in our gathering with the remembrance of the Holy Prophet and his purified progeny. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. There are over 8 billion people who live in the world today, on earth. And we find that the human global population is one that has many differences and varies across the board. And as human beings, we disagree on almost everything. We have different tastes when it comes to food. Some people like sweet, some people like spicy. We have different perceptions of beauty. You look at a painting, right? And for some people, this is the most beautiful thing in the world. For others, it's the ugliest thing in the world. When it comes to our morality, we disagree. We have moral disagreements about what constitutes right and wrong, good and bad. This is part of the environment that we live in the world today. The culture, what are known as the culture wars, right? We disagree. Some people consider X good. Others consider it to be bad. When it comes to our political sensibilities, we vary. When it comes to our religious beliefs, we disagree as human beings. We disagree about almost everything, from the smallest to the biggest. We can rarely agree on things. But there is one thing, despite all of our disagreements, that we will all agree upon. And that is the reality and the inevitability of death. No one can disagree. We all agree that it's a reality. It doesn't matter what we believe in. It doesn't matter our political views. It doesn't matter our tastes. And this is what the Quran confirms. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ. Every soul shall taste death. The Quran doesn't say everyone shall die. God says every soul shall taste death. Why? Because sometimes one of our strongest senses is the sense of taste, right? You can see something, food, you can smell it, right? But it's only until you actually taste it that you feel it in its entirety. God says every soul shall taste death. In another verse, he says, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ. Everything and everyone on the face of the planet shall perish. وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. Only God remains. We know that death is inevitable. The Quran says, wherever you may be, أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا يُدْرِككُمُ الْمَوْتِ. Go to the top of the mountains, death will catch up. Death will catch you. Go to the bottom of the sea, the depth of the sea. Death will come after you. In fact, if your death is written in the depth of the sea, you will pay $250,000 and you will rent a submarine and you will go straight to death. Death is inevitable. The Quran says, أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا يُدْرِكُّمُ الْمَوْتِ. Wherever you go. The Quran tells us that when the time of death comes, that it is neither delayed nor does it come early. It comes exactly on time. Sometimes we find that we experience certain delays in our lives, right? We find that in some of our events, our programs, right? People come late. The program starts late, right? You're told to be there at 6 o'clock. You show up at 7:30. It's normal, right? This is, Middle Eastern, Afghan, Pakistani standard time, right? You're always late. Sometimes things are early, right? You have a flight. It's rare, but sometimes your flight will depart before its time, or it is delayed. Or a program, an event will start off late. This doesn't apply to this community. Alhamdulillah, the community is on time. But there are sometimes delays before or sometimes after. But when it comes to death, God says, فَإِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهُمْ لَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ سَاعَةً وَلَا يَسْتَقْدِمُونَ. There is no advance and no delay. It's exactly on time. There's a story from the time of Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam, where we know that Prophet Sulaiman, he was a prophet, he was a king, and he was a judge. And so oftentimes, Prophet Sulaiman would hold court and he would listen to people's issues and he would judge between them. He had a trial court. And so the tradition says that one day when Prophet Sulaiman is in his court, he's listening to a trial go on. And during that time, the trial was open to the public. So people would come and they would participate, they would listen in. And as Prophet Sulaiman is listening, there's a man who is sitting in the audience. They notice that a strange figure, he appears, he enters into the courtroom, he stands by the door, and he looks around at everyone who's sitting there. Suddenly he notices one man, and he stares at him. He keeps looking at him. The man notices this strange figure is looking directly at him. He's staring at him. So he feels a little anxious. Then the man turns around, the figure turns around and he leaves, he departs. So after the trial ends, this man, he approaches Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam. He says, Ya Nabi Allah, I want to ask you a question. When we were here in court, a figure entered into your courtroom. I want to ask you, who is this figure? He told him, this figure is the angel of death, Israel. He told him, Israel came here? He said, yes. He says, he was staring at me, he was looking at me. What did Israel want with me? Why was he only looking at me? Prophet Sulaiman told him, well, usually there's one thing that the angel of death comes for. So he became anxious. He was stressed. He told him, Ya Nabi Allah, please, you're a prophet of God. I want you to pray for me for a miracle. Get me as far away from this place as possible. Send me all the way to India. This is what the tradition says. So Prophet Sulaiman, he raises his hands and said, my Lord, this man wants to go to India. Send him to India. He was sent business class to India. Several days, the tradition says, several days later, the angel of death, Israel, he visits Prophet Sulaiman. Sulaiman, he asks him, he says, listen, Israel, a few days ago, I have a question for you. A few days ago, we were in court, and you came, and you appeared in court, and you looked around, and then you left. Can you explain what was going on? He told him, Ya Nabi Allah, when I came, I had been given instructions to take the life of a particular person. So, I checked my navigation system, and it brought me to your court. It told me that the man is in your court. So I came here, and I looked around, and I saw that he was there. But my instructions explicitly told me that I would take his life in India. So I left your room, and I went to India, and I arrived to India, and I saw the man waiting for me there. Death is inevitable. It's something we will all experience. Sooner or later, when the time comes, there is no guarantee. God says, قُلْ إِنَّ الْمَوْتَ الَّذِي تَفِرُّونَ مِنْهُ فَإِنَّهُ مُلَاقِيكُمْ. Tell them, Ya Rasulullah, that death that everyone flees from, we run away from all the time, right? We're always running from death. قُلْ إِنَّ الْمَوْتَ الَّذِي تَفِرُّونَ مِنْهُ فَإِنَّهُ مُلَاقِيكُمْ. Death is running after you, and it's catching up, it's gaining speed. Death is thus, it is inevitable, dear friends. And what's more is that we find that death is one of our greatest fears. We fear a lot of things. People fear snakes. They fear spiders. They fear sharks. Usually it's animals that we fear. We fear heights. If you're like me, you fear heights, right? We fear a lot of things. And death is one of those things that is at the top of the list. In fact, according to some estimates, some surveys that have been conducted, there's only one thing that a lot of people fear more than death. And that is what? Public speaking. To stand before people and to speak publicly. For many people, they fear this more than death. Why? Why is that? Because when you speak publicly, everyone is looking at you. Everyone, all eyes are on you. Except those who are asleep, of course. Right? But besides public speaking, we all fear death. Why do we fear death? Why do we run from death? Why do we try to avoid death at all costs? Why don't we want to think about death? It could be for several reasons. If you are someone who does not believe in a life after death, in the hereafter, then the fear of death is because with death, for you, the idea of death is your complete annihilation. All you have is this life. And so you fear that sense of that stress and that anxiety of maximizing your life, right? If you only live once, then you want to maximize that life. Because for you, death is the end. It's the absolute end. Khalas. There is nothing. So we fear death. We want to maximize our life. This is why we have bucket lists. And we want to make sure that we check off all of the items off of our bucket list. We want to maximize our time here. We want to do everything and experience everything that we can. For those who don't believe in a life after death, and so they fear death. But even believers, even for us who believe in life after death, in a hereafter, we fear death. Why? Because we fear our shortcomings. Because we are always asking ourselves, am I ready for death? In dua, Abi Hamza Thamali, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, he recites, he says, فمن يكون أسوأ حالا مني إن أنا نقلت على مثل حالي إلى قبر لم أمهده لرقدتي ولم أفرشه بالعمل الصالح لضجعتي. The Imam says, who is worse off than me if at this point I am transferred to a grave that I have not prepared for, that I have not furnished. I have not furnished my grave with my deeds. We fear our shortcomings. We fear our wrongdoings. We don't want to leave this life not having prepared for our final destination, our final and next home. Yet despite this fear and this anxiety, we find that our teachings, they always push us and they encourage us to remember death. The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, he tells his companions, أَكْثِرُوا مِنْ هَادِمِ اللَّذَّاتِ. He says frequently and often remember the demolisher of delights. Hadimul ladhat. His companions, they told him, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of God, what is the demolisher of delights? He said, it is death. Death demolishes our delights, right? Death reminds us of reality. We are encouraged always and frequently to remember death. This is what our teachings tell us. Now the question is, isn't our religious tradition and our teachings, isn't it supposed to bring about a sense of peace and serenity for me? So why does it always encourage me to remember death? Why does it induce fear and anxiety in me? It's supposed to bring me peace of mind, right? My faith is supposed to make me feel calm, not to increase my stress and my anxiety. So why is it always telling me to remember death? It's going to cause me greater anxiety and stress. The answer to this, dear friends, is why fear persists. Fear of death, why does it persist with us? And there could be two reasons. Number one is lack of knowledge of what death is. And number two is unpreparedness for death. Usually we fear something that we do not know. الناس أعداء ما جهلوا, Amir al-Mu'mineen says. They are the enemies, people are the enemies. They oppose what they do not know, what they are ignorant of. And so understanding that death is a natural part of our lives. It's natural. It is necessary in this world of ours, this temporary existence of ours, and that everyone experiences death. And this is why the Quran even turns to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. He says, إِنَّكَ مَيِّتٌ وَإِنَّهُمْ مَيِّتُونَ. God says, O Rasulullah, even you will die. إِنَّكَ مَيِّتٌ وَإِنَّهُمْ مَيِّتُونَ. You will die and they will die. In another verse, God says, وَمَا جَعَلْنَا لِبَشَرٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ الْخُلْدِ. God says, never before you, Ya Rasulullah, has there ever been anyone who has not died. Everyone who came before you died. أَفَإِن مِتَّ فَهُمُ الْخَالِدُونَ. If you, in your greatness, Ya Rasulullah, if you die, do people think that they, besides you, they will be eternal? They will live forever? Death is natural. Death is inevitable. And we understand death to be this station between, this transition point, between this life, the lower life, and the final life, and the permanent life. Death is this transition. It takes us from this to that. It's kind of like when we travel. Many of us, if you travel long distances, you'll have a connection point. You'll have a transit, right? Sometimes a couple of hours, sometimes a couple of days. But you know that this is a transit point. You have another destination to go to. We don't stay in our transit point, right? Have you seen the movie The Terminal? You guys have seen the movie The Terminal? With Tom Hanks? Good movie, classic movie. It reveals, our age, I guess. Basically, the story, and I apologize for any spoiler alerts here. The guy gets stuck. He gets stuck in an airport, right? And the whole movie is about his experiences being stuck in this airport. He's not able to leave. He's not able to go back, right? But in the end, again, apologies for the spoiler alert, he ends up leaving. No one stays in the terminal or in your transit point forever. And so death is understood to be this transit point between this life, this temporary life, and the permanent life, the permanent abode. It is our return to our Lord and Creator and Master. This is why we say when someone passes away, it's customary to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We belong to God, we come from God, and to God we return. It is our transit and journey back to God. So we understand death to be natural and inevitable, and it transfers us from this lower temporary life to our permanent life and permanent abode. So number one, we understand what death is. Number two is that we understand that we need to be prepared for death. Like every journey, the journey of this life and death into the next life, we have to prepare for. When you decide to travel, you don't just go and jump on any plane, right? The first plane out of the airport. You make preparations. You make preparations in advance. You ask yourself, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? What do I want to take with me? Right? Once you've decided where you want to go, then you know what to take with you as well, right? If you're going to go to Southern California, you're going to take shorts and a t-shirt. If you're going to go to Alaska, you're going to take what? You're going to take a jacket. You're not going to take things that are irrelevant to your journey, even though they say the vast majority of people, they overpack, right? We like to carry stuff with us. I do this sometimes myself. I used to do it a lot with books, right? I'm on a flight, I have a 5-6 hour flight, and I take like 3 books with me, as though I'm going to read all 3 of them. Right? We overpack, right? But based on where you decide to go, you know what to take with you. And the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. He says, "Ad-dunya mazra'atul akhirah." Says this life is a plantation for the hereafter. And we reap what we sow. They say that there was a man who spent his entire life in construction. Several decades he worked in construction, building homes and building other buildings. And so he had reached an age where he had gotten tired and he was thinking of retiring. He had discussed with his wife that, when he retires, they would go and they would travel the world, they would experience the world. So he was very excited. He went to his boss and he said, "Listen, boss, I'm ready to retire. I want to go and discover the world with my wife. So I'm submitting my resignation. That's it, my retirement." His boss told him, "This is really sad for me. We've worked for so long together. You're a great person. You've done great work. And I'm sad to hear you go, but I understand. But I want to ask you for one favor. One last favor." He said, "What is it?" He said, "I just want you to build one more project for me before you go." The man, he was reluctant. They had a relationship for a long time, so he said, "Okay, fine. One more project, that's it." The project was to build a home, one last home. And so he received the blueprints, the architectural plans, and he got to work building material. But the whole time he's working on this project, he's thinking about what? Bali. He's thinking about his vacation. So he just put something together really quick. Really quick. Put some materials together just so he can finish the project. He finished the project, he goes to his boss, he says, project is done, khalas. Now do you give me permission? Can I go? His boss turns to him, he says, give me your hand. Extends his hand. He takes a set of keys, he puts it in his hand. He says, this home that you just built, this is my gift to you, my last gift to you. If I knew that it was going to be mine, spent time, effort, I would have used the best materials. Right? Ad-dunya mazra'atul akhirah, the Prophet says. This life that we are given, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50, 70, 100 years, is a time, an opportunity for us to do what? To build our final homes. God has given us instructions. He has given us materials. He has given us a roadmap, a blueprint, architectural plans. It's up to us to decide, what kind of home do I want to live in? What kind of house do I want to live in? Thus, when it comes to remembering death frequently and often, this acts as what? It acts as a reality check for us. It grounds us. Because we forget very often. We get preoccupied with every aspect of life. Right? And it's really easy for us to forget. Remembering death is kind of like the rumble strips on the side of the road. You know, you're driving sometimes, right? On the sides of the road, on a highway, and there are rumble strips. Why are there rumble strips on there? So that if you're driving and you doze off, you fall asleep and you swerve, the rumble strips do what? They violently shake you awake. Can you sleep through rumble strips? You can't. Doesn't matter how deep of a sleeper you are. It's going to jolt you up. It's going to wake you up. Remembering death does that. It's a reality check. It wakes us up. It says, hey, you've fallen asleep. You've forgotten your purpose. This is a reality check. You have an objective. You have a purpose that you need to work for and build. It helps us to avoid heedlessness. It helps us to avoid falling into the many traps of Satan. Satan's ultimate objective is to make us forget, is to make us ghafil, heedless. And he has many tactics, dear friends. They say one day a man, he fell asleep and he saw in his dream that he met Iblis, Satan. He met him. So he thought to himself, he said, you know what? This is Iblis himself. This person is famous, right? This is an opportunity for me to ask some questions. So he says, listen, Iblis, I have some questions for you, if you don't mind answering. Tells him, yeah, what is it? He says, I'm kind of curious about your tactics. You are very good at misleading people. I want to know what kind of tactics you use. So Iblis, he takes the man, he says, come here, let me show you my garage. Let me show you my tools. He takes him first to one side. He says, listen, these are my tools. He shows him a huge anchor. You know those anchors that are used in the big cruise ships? The huge anchor, the chain. He says, I use this around those among the people who are the most difficult for me to mislead. I wrap it around them and I pull them with a huge anchor, right? But they're very difficult, so I need to use this huge anchor. Then he turned, he went, proceeded. He said, then I have this chain that's smaller than an anchor. I use this for those who are a little bit easier. They're still very tough. I need to use a chain, but they're a little bit easier. I don't need to use an anchor to pull them, to drag them. Then he went on, he showed him a thick rope. He said, this is for those who were a little bit easier. Then he showed him a small rope. Then he showed him a string. He said, these are my tools. Some people with a string, I tie a string around them and I pull them. They're that easy to pull. So the man, he was astonished. He said, this is fascinating to me. Let me ask you a question. Which of these tools do you use for me? He said, I just go like this and you come running to me. Heedless. We forget. We go running towards shaitan. We are drowning in our concerns of this life. And we forget about our objective. Remembering death wakes us up again, gives us a jolt. It allows us not to be heedless. It allows us not to lose sight, not to focus on this life at the expense of the next life. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, شَرُّ النَّاسِ مَنْ بَاعَ آخِرَتَهُ بِدُنْيَا. Says the worst of people are those who give away their hereafter for this life. They give it away. It's a sale, it's a transaction. They give the permanency and the greatness of the hereafter, they give it away in return for what? The temporariness of this life and its allure. And then he goes on, he says, and the one who is even worse than this situation is the one who gives away his hereafter for someone else's dunya. You sell your soul for someone else. We give up the hereafter. We focus on this life at the expense of the hereafter. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's just like visiting somewhere. Your job, they tell you to go and to travel somewhere, right? For a week, you have to go and do work for a week. They put you in a hotel, right? Imagine this, they put you in a hotel for a week. After a week you're coming back, you're departing. Once you arrive, the first thing you do, you check in, you ask, the receptionist, you ask them, or you look it up on Google, where's IKEA, the closest IKEA. You go to IKEA and you buy furniture. You buy a bed, you buy a nightstand, you buy a nice couch, right? Like a lazy boy, right? You buy all sorts of beautiful things, all sorts of beautiful furniture, a nice range, a nice, washing machine, dryer, and you buy it and you bring it and you furnish your hotel room. Right? If anyone sees this, they'll say, you're crazy. You're insane. What's wrong with you? You're going to leave in a week. So sometimes we focus solely on this life at the expense of the hereafter. Don't get me wrong, brothers and sisters. We are in this life. We live in this life. We are encouraged to live comfortably, to take care of ourselves and our family, to enjoy, as long as it is with the boundaries of what is permissible, to enjoy this life. But what we are discouraged from doing is focusing only on this life and forgetting the hereafter. اعمل, the hadith says, اعمل لدنياك كأنك تعيش أبدا واعمل لآخرتك كأنك تموت غدا. Work for this life as though you're going to live forever, but work for the hereafter as though you're going to die tomorrow. Today, the world is a world of investments, no? Everyone gives you investment advice. We're all thinking about how we can invest our wealth and our money. Short-term investments, long-term investments, right? All sorts of investments. Now, I'm not here to give you financial investment advice. Don't take financial investment advice from me, please. But in the business world, for those who know something about investments, they tell you that the best investments are what? Are the long-term investments. Nowadays, most of us are impatient. We want our money, especially young people. They want to grow their money. You ask them, what do you want to do in a year? They say, I want to become a millionaire. We're impatient. We're impatient. We want to grow our money very, very quickly, right? We want to quickly make it. But those who are successful in life, they'll tell you, you have to be very patient. If you want to be successful financially, you need to think about long-term investments, right? You should be patient. You should not hurry. So the best investments are the long-term investments, financially, but also spiritually, brothers and sisters. The best investments are those that are long-term, those that are made for the next life. At the time of death, the hadith says, at the time of death, the people we leave behind, they will ask a question. They will say, what has he or she left behind? This is a question we all ask, right? Someone passes away. Could be a parent, it could be a grandparent, it could be a family member, someone in the community passes away. And people, including those who are closest to them, their family, their relatives, their children, one of the first questions that they ask is what? What did they leave behind for me? What am I going to get? This is what we ask. This is what people ask. And the angels, the hadith says, the angels, they ask, what has he brought forth? What has he brought forth? The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, he says in the famous hadith, very well known, he says, every one of us has 3 friends. 3 friends. And these 3 friends, they interact with us differently when it comes to our death. He says the first friend is your wealth, your money. This money takes care of you when you're alive. Every day. You want to buy something, it's easy. You got a credit card. You have cash. Takes care of you, takes you where you want to go. It feeds you what you want to eat. You can do whatever you want. It's very loyal to you. But the loyalty of your wealth, according to the hadith, he says, it stays loyal to you throughout your entire life until you take your last breath. Once that last breath is gone, that friend, their loyalty ends there. Khalas. It does not do anything for you anymore. Maybe it might be used to prepare you, to wash and shroud you and buy you a burial place and bury you, but that's it. Otherwise, it changes its loyalty. It now goes and becomes loyal to someone else. He says your second friend is your family and your friends in this life. They stay with you throughout this life. They accompany you. They support you. And even they stay with you at the time of death. They surround you. They come after you, around you. They weep and they cry. You pass away and they take care of your janazah. They wash you, they shroud you, they participate in your funeral. They sit down and they recite some verses of the Quran and they do dua for you. But then what happens? After you are buried, half an hour later, an hour later, 2 hours later, everyone gets up and leaves. I have school tomorrow, I have work tomorrow, I have other things to do. They may come every once in a while, they visit your grave, they remember you every once in a while. But their loyalty, their friendship stops there. Then he says your third friend or companion is your deeds. It stays with you during your life. And it accompanies you after your death and when you are in your grave. And it sticks with you even after you are resurrected from the grave. And it stays with you until God makes His final judgment. Our good deeds and our bad deeds, they stay with us. We take them with us until we face our Lord. So we have to ask ourselves, this closest friend of mine, what am I taking with me? What am I taking until that final destination? What am I taking with me? Imagine yourself at your own funeral, brothers and sisters. Take a moment. Imagine yourself at your own funeral. You have been buried. Family, friends, others. And ask yourself, what kind of legacy do I want to leave behind me? How do I want those who participate in my funeral and outside, how do I want them to remember me? Do I want them to remember me and say, well, yeah, he had a beautiful Porsche. Remember that Porsche? Look, remember his house? Remember how much money he had? Remember how famous he was? Or do I want them to remember me as a person who was kind, as someone who was generous, as someone who helped others, as someone who uplifted others, as someone who built, who contributed, who did good for society and for himself and his family? How do I want to build my legacy? The Quran says, Al-malu wal-banun zinatul hayatid dunya wal-baqiyatul salihat khayrun inda rabbika thawaban wa khayrun amala. He says, wealth and family, they are the beauty, the adornment of this life. They are. But the Quran says, wal-baqiyatul salihat. There are some things, the perpetual goodness, those things that remain after you and me are long gone. There are some things that remain after us, long after we are gone. Those good perpetual acts of goodness, God says, those al-baqiyatul salihat khayrun inda rabbika thawaba wa khayrun amala. They are a greater source of hope for us. Do I want to build a legacy after I'm gone? Do I want people to remember me with goodness? And they say, mashallah, may Allah bless this person. They see a school, a hospital, they see an Islamic center, a mosque, they see another project, and they say, mashallah, may Allah bless the soul of so-and-so who contributed to this. Huh? وَالْبَاقِيَاتُ الصَّالِحَاتِ. What kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? Build for the hereafter. Don't just build in this life. Build in this life, but don't forget the hereafter. Those who continue to prepare for that inevitable journey, the journey of death, and their hereafter, they have nothing to fear and nothing to worry. This is what Amir al-Mu'mineen says. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, if you do what you need to do, and you avoid what you need to avoid, and you have good conduct, you have good akhlaq, your character is good, you are good to people, you are generous, you are kind, you are assisting, you are humble. If you do this, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, ثُمَّ لَا يُبَالِي أَوَقَعَ عَلَى الْمَوْتِ أَمْ وَقَعَ الْمَوْتُ عَلَيْهِ. Then he or she will not care whether they go towards death or death comes towards them. And this is the same message that we heard and we find from Ashura. How is it possible that people, they march towards certain death? They know. They were not confused. They were not confused. At some point in their journey, Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his family, his companions, when they were at least in Karbala and they were surrounded by the forces, they knew that this was the end. How is it possible that they march towards death? Because they're prepared. They have nothing to worry about. When Imam Hussein and his family, they are on their way to Karbala. They've been blocked off from entering Kufa, and they are heading now towards Karbala. The report says that Imam Hussein was riding his horse, and as he's riding, next to him is his son Ali al-Akbar. He's also riding. That Imam Hussein falls asleep. He's riding and he falls asleep. And then he wakes up and he begins to recite La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliy al-azim. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. There is no might and no power except in God. We are from God and to God we return. His son Ali al-Akbar, he hears his father. He turns to him. He says, my father, I hear in your voice the sound of distress, this call of distress. Tell me, my father, what is it that is on your mind? He tells him, my dear son Ali, I fell asleep and I saw very clearly He said, I saw very clearly what awaits us. And so I woke up. Look at Ali al-Akbar. He turns to his father. He says, my father, are we not on the path of truth? He tells him, yes, my son, of course. Look at how Imam Hussein raised Ali al-Akbar. Ali al-Akbar, whose conscience, who knows, and who consoles his father. He tells him, but father, he asks him, are we not on the truth? We know we're on the truth. Abu Abdullah says, yes, my son, certainly we are on the path of truth. Ali al-Akbar, he replies to his father, then he says, father, it doesn't matter whether we proceed towards death or death proceeds towards us. This is the grandson of Ali ibn Abi Talib. After the companions, they fell one by one. It was the turn of Bani Hashim, the family of Rasulullah, the family of Abu Abdullah. The first to stand up was Ali al-Akbar. Young man. Some reports put him in his early 20s, mid-20s. Young man. He turns to his father, Abu Abdullah. He says, my father, grant me permission to go out onto the battlefield. La ilaha illallah. How can this father who raised Ali al-Akbar with his own hands, who saw him grow, this young man in his prime, how can this father give permission to his son to go out onto the battlefield? Imam Hussein, he embraces Ali al-Akbar. He embraces him very close. He hugs him, he kisses him, he begins to weep and cry. He says, my dear son Ali, how can I give you permission to go out? He tells him, Ya Abu Abdullah, oh my dear father, please give me permission to go out and to defend our family and to defend our honor and to defend this message, the message of our grandfather Rasulullah. So Imam Hussein, he gives permission to Ali al-Akbar to go out. As Ali al-Akbar proceeds out, Imam Hussein, he raises his head to the sky. He says, oh my Lord, bear witness that the one who was most in resemblance, أشبه الناس خلقا وخلقا ومنطقا برسول الله. He was most in his physical appearance, in his demeanor, in his thoughts, in the way that he carried himself. He was the one that most resembled Rasulullah. And whenever we would yearn for, we would miss Rasulullah, we would look at Ali al-Akbar. Witness that he has gone out onto the battlefield. Ali al-Akbar, he is brave. He is the son of Al-Hussein. He is the grandson of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He goes out and he fights for an extended period of time. He fights the enemies, killing them in the dozens, one after another, until he becomes tired. It's very hot. He is fighting. He is very tired. He has not had any water for a while. So at this moment, as he is fighting, the tradition says that his mother, Layla, he has a mother too, not just a father. Layla, from her tent, she is looking at the face of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And she notices the expressions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. At some point she sees Imam Hussein, he's smiling. She knows that her son is courageous and he has the upper hand in the battle. Then she notices his face shift. And so she turns out and she calls out to Abu Abdullah. She says, Abu Abdullah, this is our son. Imam Hussein, he turns to her. He tells her, go into your tent and turn to Allah in dua, for the dua of the mother is acceptable for her son. Layla, she goes back to her tent. She turns. She says, my Lord, Ilahi, Ya Rad Yusuf ila Yaqub. Oh my Lord, the one who brought Yusuf back to Yaqub, bring back Ali to me. At this moment, Ali al-Akbar, the tradition says, he turns around and he comes heading back to the camp of Imam Hussein. He comes down from his horse. He turns to his father. He turns to his mother. He sees them. He turns to his father. He says, my dear father, do we have any water? I'm very thirsty. Just give me a drop of water. Aba Abdullah, he says, my beloved son Ali, I promise you that I am also thirsty. I do not have any water to give you, but my son Ali, go out. And I promise you that your grandfather Rasulullah is waiting for you in order to quench your thirst from the water of paradise. When Ali al-Akbar, he hears this, he feels inspired and strength. So he turns around and he goes back out onto the battlefield and he is reinvigorated. He fights with the enemies. Umar ibn Sa'd, he sees him. He commands his troops, he said, surround him. This is the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Surround him from every direction. Do not give him any room. He will demolish our army. So they surround him and they begin to strike him from every direction. Ali al-Akbar is struck. He is bleeding intensely. The tradition says that he falls onto his horse. His horse is not able to see. So it takes him towards the camp of the enemies. They surround him and they begin to strike him from every direction. He turns and he calls out, Abata, assalamu alayka minni ya Aba Abdullah. My father, peace and blessings upon me. Hada Jaddi, now I see my grandfather Rasulullah, and he is quenching my thirst with water from paradise, and he has promised for you also another cup. Al-ajal, al-ajal, inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. صلى الله وسلم عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. All together. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. For the soul of all of the marhumin and marhumat, let us recite Surah Al-Fatiha مع الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.